G'day, my name's Andrew Hoggard, and thank you. Hi there, Andrew Hoggard here, and thank you for joining us. I'm beaming in today from a very wet and sodden Manawatu. Certainly would love some global warming today to dry the place out. But anyway, today what we're talking about is the He Waka Eke Noa proposal or the consultation document that's going to be we're working on for doing the farmer consultation in February. And today I've got with me Macaulay Jones, who's our main policy analyst who covers climate change for us and has had to sit in numerous meetings over the last 2 years on this subject, and also Lauren Hale, who's our communications advisor, who's going to be handling sort of Q&A for this. If you've got questions, please enter them into the Q&A at any point. What's the format will be that Macaulay will basically run through a few slides first of all, and then we'll open up to the Q&A. We've had some questions already be sent through, so we'll cover those first, and then we'll get to further questions from anyone. Really keen to hear everyone's feedback. What we're wanting to do is get an understanding of farmers' thoughts, opinions, what you're concerned about, what changes you might like to see, or whether you think the whole thing's horrible. And that's going to help us, form our position on where we stand with this or changes we'll push to get made. But I will flick it over now to Macaulay to give you basically a little bit of a rundown on some of the key points. We won't go too much into it, but just the basics, and then open up for all your questions. So if we can start sharing the slides, and there you go, Macaulay.
Brilliant. Thank you, Andrew. Can everyone hear me okay?
Yes, we can.
Oh, brilliant. So thanks, Andrew. And Cam Henderson also is the steering group member for us in He Waka Eke Noa, and he's an apology for today because he's in an all-day steering group meeting. So yeah, Cam's an apology for that, and he's another one that's very much into the weeds for us and took over from Karen Williams, our vice president, in that role. So yeah, as Andrew mentioned, I'll run through these slides quite quickly because I want to get to questions from you guys as quickly as possible. So at Federated Farmers, we've been running, we're calling targeted engagement with provincial executives and industry executives for the past week and a bit, and this is the first one we've had with members, but in February and March there's going to be a lot of consultation with farmers as well. So this is very early on, and any of you guys that have read through the targeted engagement document would know that it is you guys are very much seeing the sausage being made, so to speak. But without further ado, I'll rip into it. So if we go to the next slide, please. Brilliant. So I'll get through this quickly, but I think it's quite important to set the scene to say why are we doing this. So 2017, the government was elected with a policy of bringing agriculture into the ETS. They put forward a working group and an interim committee working at how to do that best. We're involved in consultation with them. Towards the end of it, that consultation period, us as an industry, as the primary sector, said, well, if you're gonna price agricultural emissions, rather than doing it in a way that involves the ETS and in a way that we have a lot of problems with, how about we work together with the government and achieve the same result but in a better means. And that was put forward in a document called the Primary Sector Climate Change Commitment. That document was accepted by the government. There was a press release by the government and industry, and there was a big announcement in the Beehive. And after it was accepted, the Primary Sector Climate Change Commitment became the Primary Sector Climate Action Partnership, or He Waka Eke Noa. And as you see down at the bottom there, it is a broad church of organisations, including all those organisations from industry and iwi Maori groups, and the MFE and MPI from the government side as well. Go to the next slide, please, Lauren. So as that document was being put together, Federated Farmers were involved basically since the start of it. It involves a broad range of commitments from industry to reduce, measure and manage agricultural emissions. But a key line in it for us, and a key part of this consultation for farmers is that second paragraph there that involves putting in place a pricing mechanism for agricultural emissions, as that paragraph says, to incentivize the use of commercially available, cost-effective mitigation tools that lower global emissions. So the details of that are quite important. There was a lot of back and forward around that wording. And if we go to the next slide, please. The reason there was sort of such back and forward around that wording is Federated Farmers' policy around climate change. So this policy dates back to 2017, I believe. And we worked quite hard to ensure that the climate change commitment, He Waka Eke Noa, is consistent with our climate change policy. So that policy involves taking a split gas approach for biogenic methane. So as many of you will know that, as it's reported now, methane makes up about 80% of agriculture's warming and about a third of New Zealand's warming. And that's based on a metric that's out of date and it's not accurate for the purposes that New Zealand's using it. So we said that any pricing mechanism can't use the GWP 100 metric that lumps all gases together. It must either use a better metric or a split gas approach. And I think that's an area where we've been all the two industry options in all the two He Waka Eke Noa options are quite good at using that. The second option is that we want to use a price to incentivize farmers to farm better and not less. That's how I sort of think about these next two. So that involves using cost-effective mitigation tools. At the moment when we're going through this, coated urea is the main one. So there's very few tools in the toolbox, and that's why this task is so challenging. And then the last one is that we don't want New Zealand farmers to shrink production to meet targets for a price to basically set up a system that encourages farmers to reduce production, because New Zealand farmers are the most climate efficient in the world, and global demand for food is certainly not going away. And when you've got inelastic demand and reduced supply from New Zealand, that's only going to be lead to increased demand from less efficient countries, increasing overall global emissions. So we took this to National Council, and these three pricing policy considerations, they said that that's consistent with that language in that previous slide, and that's how we've still been a part of He Waka Eke Noa to date. So as we're going through these options, that's the sort of core lens that us as Federated Farmers have been using, to saying, does it tick these three boxes? And that's something we're interested to hear from you guys, what you think in that regard too. If we go to the next slide, please, Laura. Oh, please, Katie. So this is after the government took industry up on the offer to undertake the He Waka Eke Noa work plan. The Climate Change Response Act was amended to put in place milestones. So as you can see there's milestones involving knowing your numbers, your methane, nitrous oxide numbers. There's milestones involving having a greenhouse gas component of a farm environment plan. But it's that first bullet point of that third set of milestones that this target engagement document, that the engagement in February, March, and that the report delivered to ministers in the end of April, that's what all this relates to. So all those other milestones are still going along, ticking along, and no matter which option we go with, they need to be undertaken. But this is all about the framework for a pricing mechanism. Next slide, please. So I've got three broad pricing options, two developed as a part of He Waka Eke Noa, and one that is the government backstop. As feds and as industry, we didn't agree with the government putting in place the backstop. We described it as an act of poor faith to start a partnership process, but the government did it anyway, and we got on with working out these He Waka Eke Noa options anyway. So there are three options, but the government backstop ETS is what He Waka Eke Noa essentially is an alternative to, and is a result of industry opposition to. So that's put in place as a control to compare the others to. But Federated Farmers certainly do not support that option. And we'll run through these three quickly, touch on sequestration, and then we'll open it up for questions. So if we go to the next slide, please. So this is the government's first option. So that was to bring agriculture into the ETS. So that would involve doing so at a processor level. So farmers purchasing synthetic fertilizer, selling animals to meatworks, or selling milk to a milk processor would face a charge. The charge would have been faced by their processor. So your milk, meat, or fertilizer company would have had to buy NZUs and then pass that cost on to farmers. I think roughly 12 months ago, the price of an NZU was sitting around $35. And I think 12 months before that, it was about 20 something dollars, and it's pushing $70 now. So the trend at the moment is that the end price of the NZU will likely go up. At the moment, it doesn't look too bad of an option in some of those tables because industry farmers are receiving 95% for allocation, so paying 5% of the cost. But that price will likely go down while the NZU price goes up. So it does set a, in the long term, it doesn't bode well for farmers. There's no split gas approach in this option, so methane's fully fungible with the other options, meaning that it can be, long-lived gases are swapped out with short-lived gases, and that goes against all the best science on gases, including the latest IPCC AR6 report. So that we've got many problems with that, and another core problem is that two farmers producing the same amount of meat, milk, charge the same amount for their product, regardless of how efficiently they produce that. And at its core, as stated in that second slide, we want this pricing mechanism to incentivize the use of tools, to incentivize farmers to farm more efficiently and smarter, and not recognizing that is a core flaw. If we go to the next slide, please. So that's why we've been the He Waka Eke Noa programs. I've compared it to a duck on water. Not a lot going on above the surface, but we have been kicking away below the surface. So it's been 2 years now, and we've come up with two options. The first of which is a farm level split gas levy. So it operates, as you can see in that box on the right hand side there, on this A plus B minus C way of calculating your price. So A is the amount of methane your farm is responsible for. B times the price for that methane. B is the same for nitrous oxide, and C is minus the sequestration that you've opted into for the He Waka Eke Noa scheme. To calculate A, B, and C, rather than calculating it by the product, you calculate it by the amount of the gas. Farmers will have to use a He Waka Eke Noa tool to calculate that gas. There's no need for a metric. So for methane, it's just the amount of methane used. So neither GWP 100 or GWP star or any of the other metrics are being used. It is taking a split gas approach, but on the weight of gas, which is good. So based on that, it will generate revenue in policy speak, as in have a pot of money that farmers have contributed to. And then as an industry, we're sort of trying to work out, well, what would we want that money spent on? Research, development, recognizing sequestration are two broad options. Perhaps extension services are another option. But we talked about having a farm-based rebate. So if we go to the next slide, please. These are two other options we've talked about as to how to essentially spend that revenue or spend the money contributed by farmers. So there was a land-based and a rebate, an output-based rebate mentioned. So a land-based rebate would essentially recognise farmers that are farming to the carrying capacity of their land and use that to, and so those farmers would receive money. The farmers who are not would put in money, and those in the middle would not, would do neither. So that we didn't fully support this option, mostly because of the difficulties in defining carrying capacity, and it would involve a map that would define each parcel of land, which was quite a challenging task. The second option we're more in favour of, that has been taken off the table at this stage, but we're keen to hear from you guys what you think of it. That would involve creating a sort of a bell curve for the efficiency of each farm based on the amount of product produced, so be that milk or meat. And then for your methane, not your nitrous oxide, but just your methane, if you're producing milk or meat more efficiently, you'd receive a rebate to knock off the cost of He Waka Eke Noa. If you're on the left-hand side of the rebate, you have to contribute more to meeting this rebate. And if you're in the middle, there'd be no benefit or no added cost. This does add complexity, but we see this as being a way of promoting not only reducing absolute emissions, but promoting increased emissions efficiency, which is quite an important issue for us, and ensuring that emissions leakage doesn't occur. So we're interested to hear from you guys what you think of that option, and if that's something we as Federated farmers should keep pushing for. If we go to the next slide, please. So with the farm level split gas option, a core challenge of that was calculating and estimating the administration costs that would result, both in setting up the tool, so having a tool for farmers to plug in various data points and get that A, B part of the equation. So setting up that tool, having farmers get the data to put into that tool, and operating that tool as well. So early estimates put the cost of setting that up at about $100 million, a little bit more than that, and with significant ongoing costs as well. So those details are in the engagement document, and we're interested to hear from you guys whether those estimates are reasonable. But if they are, then we wanted to look for an alternative as a He Waka Eke Noa partnership, and that's how the processor hybrid option came up, as a way of hopefully getting some of the best parts of the farm level system, but hopefully with much less of a cost. So it still operates on A plus B minus C, but instead of having a calculator tell you what the gases are, it works on your meat and milk again, and on your fertilizer and the amount of fertilizer purchased. So it does have that problem of, two farmers with different efficiencies both have the same cost. But rather than requiring your meat and milk companies to purchase NZUs and to be exposed to that, and to have methane be interchangeable with carbon dioxide and long-lived gases in the rest of the economy, it does take a split gas approach. And another core benefit is that it involves what we're calling emissions management contracts. So these EMCs will involve, they're still a work in progress, but will involve a system for farmers that are either promising to reduce their emissions past a benchmark, or promising to undertake actions that will reduce emissions, or to have the sequestration side of that A plus B minus C, to opt in to have sequestration recognised. They can undertake that voluntary binding contract, and hopefully receive recognition for the fact that they are below that A and B as it's calculated on the meat and milk side. So this has the main advantage of this system is that it's cheaper than the farm level, but there are some core disadvantages as well. And at Feds, when we talk about this, we were sort of hoping that it'd be an interim measure. And that's been a question: is do we want to go for this interim measure in the short term, or go straight to the farm level if we do want to do that? If we go to the next slide, please. So sequestration is an issue. Getting better recognition for sequestration is an issue that we hear a lot from farmers. There are broad categories outlined in the document. At a high level, it's sequestration that wasn't in the ground at 2008 can broadly get credit. There's more categories for native sequestration, native vegetation, than there are for exotic sequestration, recognising the broader benefits that delivers. There pre-1990 native vegetation can receive credit for excluding stock and for undertaking pest control, and that's credit for not the stock itself, not the carbon stock that is, but it's credit for the additional carbon that results from undertaking these activities and having that forest regenerate. So a broad principle in this is the additionality, which is that from 2025 going forward, the credit will be for new sequestration, so either growth in trees or riparian margins, or regeneration in bush. It won't be credit for sequestration already on your farm. And that's another concern we have. While that makes sense from a carbon accounting point of view, the downside is that it's essentially punishing farmers that have looked after trees on their farm and vegetation on their farm to date, and it's providing an incentive for and recognising farmers who have cleared those trees, and then can get paid to replant them. So we'll go to the next slide, please. So at a high level, there are some unresolved questions that we see it now for Feds. What's the gas levy approach? If we go to the next slide, I think there's hang on, if we just go forward a few slides, I think we might have keep going. Yep, there we go. That one's perfect. Yeah, so yeah, we'll leave it here. So there are a few unresolved questions as far as we see it. This is as a process that is a partnership process with industry and government. We wanted to make sure as Federated farmers that we engage with farmers, regular and often. We have a farmer reference group set up, and we're not going to you guys and telling you, here's what we've done, what do you think? It's saying, here's what we've done, what do you think, and what do you want us to change? We're open to new ideas. There's some options where we don't have a preference, where it's really up to you guys, and that's been an issue that's really important to us at Feds. It's having that farmer engagement be very genuine and not a box ticking exercise, because we've all been involved in those processes where it's you get the impression that it's more of a sales job than genuine consultation. So yeah, I'll leave it there, and I welcome the questions, and thanks very much.
Okay, Lauren, do you want to start firing off the questions to us?
Yeah, so thanks, Mac. As Andrew said earlier, we've got some questions that were sent in earlier before the webinar. So we'll go through them first, and then we'll do our best to get through the Q&A questions. But if not, we'll hopefully be able to answer them via email after the webinar. So the first one we've got is, why is grass growth not allowed for sequestration of carbon? Most dairy farms would grow around 17 tonnes of dry matter per annum. This must account for a fair amount of CO2.
I can take that one if you like, Andrew.
Yep.
Yeah, so grass isn't counted for the reason that if farmers wanted it counted every time an animal consume that grass, or every time that grass was chopped down for hay, they'd have to then pay that money back and get a liability. So that doesn't make any sense. The other one is that when animals, say a cow in that dairy farm example, if a cow eats grass, when they breathe out CO2, that CO2 is not counted. So that's why when they eat that grass, the CO2 from that grass isn't counted. So that's why when that grass grows, it's not counted as well. The problem with the cycle there is that short period of time in which the cow expels methane, and that's the issue there. But for the carbon dioxide from the animal, like humans, cows breathe out CO2. That's not counted. And if every time the grass was chopped down you had to account for it, it'd be full-time paperwork fill outers and not farmers.
Awesome. Next question. Given that the Paris Agreement focuses on warming, and given that we know that GWP 100 does not work for methane, which makes up 80% of the ag sector's emissions, why do we not challenge the repeated statement that the New Zealand ag sector makes up 48% of New Zealand's total greenhouse gas profile? Why is this not being challenged and refocused to warming?
Yeah, so basically, I think every submission you've written on this MAC, we have always talked about the fact that we may be 48% of gross emissions, but we're certainly not net, and we are certainly not in terms of warming. So our submission on the Climate Change Response Act, we pushed for a target, not based on GWP 100, but based on the new metric of GWP star, which said you only need to reduce emissions by 0.3% per year to achieve, no additional warming. And so that's what we've been pushing for quite a long time now. So yeah, totally agree that the Paris Accord is all about warming. And yeah, we just keep pushing that one, take every opportunity. Every time I'm on the radio talking about climate change, I'm always pushing back on that one, talking about the warming impact, and that's what we need to focus on. But yeah, just to be clear, the targets aren't part of He Waka Eke Noa. That's in the Climate Change Response Act. That's different. We don't get to set the targets in He Waka Eke Noa as much as we'd like to, but it is two different streams.
The next one.
I'm sorry, Lauren, I just thought I'd just quickly add to that as well. And that's one we've certainly received a lot of feedback on, and yeah, keen to get more feedback from members as to the Feds essentially taking an agree to disagree principle in the targets and setting that aside and saying whatever the targets are, He Waka Eke Noa is a means of contributing towards those targets, not necessarily meeting those targets if meeting them means perverse outcomes in other areas. Is that a situation that members are okay with, or is agree to disagree for an issue as important as target something that shouldn't be set aside for He Waka Eke Noa? That's something that we're keen to get feedback on. That's the approach we've taken to date, what we see as being a pragmatic approach, but certainly keen for feedback from members as well.
Okay, why does He Waka Eke Noa not use GWP star when many farms, particularly sheep and beef farms, have long-term stabilised livestock numbers, which GWP star accords as being warming neutral? Why are they not going to be taxed?
So I guess the key thing here is GWP star. How I view GWP star is it's a sort of an umbrella that sits over the top that sort of forms the targets as you would for the industry. So, for all of New Zealand ag, we want to reduce it 0.3% per year. So all of New Zealand ag is not contributing to warming. Underneath that, we're going to have farms in various stages of development. And so if you had it down at the farm level, it would effectively be grandparenting. So if you were super efficient, you had done everything you possibly could, you might not have that much wriggle room to reduce more. But there may be someone who's completely inefficient, who's been, massively overstocked the farm, and they'll be able to reduce numbers by quite a lot, or make their system a hell of a lot more efficient, get the reductions down, and they'll look like the hero for sitting on their hands. So, yeah, trying to do it at the farm level is, there is a concern there I've got around grandparenting, but it is a great thing to be at the industry level, talking about it at the industry level. Just at the farm level, I think it's just going to add too much complexity and cost and trying to measure it that way, and also throw out some perverse outcomes for some farmers as opposed to others. Mac, did you have anything else to add?
No, that's a good explanation, Andrew, and that's why the GWP star, we've used that to inform our advocacy for a 10% 2050 biogenic methane target. If that target's achieved, the New Zealand economy is warming neutral from biogenic methane, and agriculture is warming neutral from methane. Going below that gets complicated, but the no additional warming principle for methane at a national level makes a lot of sense, and we're still, we've been quite vocal on that in the 3 years I've been at Feds and longer than that, and that's something we're still pushing for. Once you've got that national target that makes sense, I think a lot of issues at the farm level would click into place, and that's a challenge we have at the moment, is that we have unscientific national targets. It's good that New Zealand's taken a split gas approach, but the targets that are in place make little to no sense, quite politically driven. So that's what we're using for GWP. That's based on GWP star, and that approach of taking a split gas approach, based on that science, that's also included in that AR6 report I mentioned. They talk about either using better metrics or using a split gas approach, and we've erred towards a split gas approach informed by that the GWP star and the latest science around methane, and we're still pushing for that while being a part of He Waka Eke Noa.
The Paris Agreement also made feeding the world and maintaining food production one of their sustainable development goals. If the pricing for agricultural emissions causes stock numbers to drop or farms to convert to forestry, then that is going against that goal. Shouldn't the ag sector, as food producers, be exempt?
Correct. In terms of, that's what the Paris Accord is about. It is about, we've got to feed the planet. We've got to do it in the most efficient way possible. It recognises we've got to reduce emissions, but we've also got to feed the planet. And so this sensible solution from that is you do it where you can most efficiently do it, which luckily for us happens to be New Zealand. And so that's kind of why we favour the output approach in there that Mac mentioned earlier, because that is about, focusing on that efficiency level. And there, hopefully for the February consultation, you will get to see reports on emissions leakage. So for those that don't understand what emissions leakage is it's basically where, we cut production here in New Zealand, prices are high all around the world. So some inefficient producer somewhere else in the world now is able to fill in that production. They, of course, do it at a much higher footprint. Global emissions actually go up. So that's what emissions leakage means. And so, yeah, we'll have a report showing what is the likely emissions leakage from these scenarios. So far, I believe, Mac, that the output-based approach in the draft reports is showing the least amount of emissions leakage. So, it's been a position of ours at Feds is, we shouldn't have a pricing mechanism if it's just going to drive production offshore. So, we're waiting to see where that final report lands and what it has to say. Mac, anything else to add there?
Yeah, just that throughout this whole process, Federated farmers, we have taken quite an international approach to this, is that we recognise that there could be a role for pricing to incentivise farmers to farm more efficiently and to use tools that otherwise there would not be an incentive to use. And in international forums that we're involved in as Federated farmers, and likewise for the government, it's great to say that we're involved in this He Waka Eke Noa process, developing a pricing mechanism. There's a lot of interest internationally, but we don't see a way to lead the world as, hey, look how much production we've decreased, how much food production we've foregone, and look, we've reduced emissions by shrinking production in the most efficient producer in the world. That's more of a cautionary tale for large producers with a lot of people, hundreds of millions of people or billions of people to feed. I don't see that as leadership. That's not an example for the world to follow. But whereas if we can get this pricing mechanism in place that does incentivize those tools, that does that is consistent with our policy, that's something that the rest of the world could look at and say, oh, that's something we might follow. Well, rather than, well, what a basket case that's been. We're not going to do that. So that's the approach we've taken as a small country in the South Pacific. We can lead the world by showing an example, but the inverse of that is true. I mean, we don't want to be a cautionary tale. We want to be an example to follow.
All right, last question that got sent in prior to the webinar. This is more of an example question. I planted pines between 1987 and 1993 to minimise erosion on the steeper areas of my farm. Some of these areas have been harvested, so are no longer eligible for entry into the ETS, as they are second rotation, and others are ready for harvest, so no longer worth putting into the ETS. Are these able to be used to offset emissions within this partnership, or do I have to cut them all down and revert to pasture to help pay for the emission liabilities?
Throw that hospital pass to you, Mac.
Yeah, well, first of all, very good question. And happy to, certainly, whoever asked the question, certainly happy to chat about it offline. It is one where we're going to have to pass through those categories. But broadly, I think forestry that was in place, exotic forestry that was in place pre-2008, I think will struggle to get recognition under this system. If it is ETS eligible and it is exotic forestry, I don't think it counts. I'm not across it as I should be, the sequestration categories, but I don't think it'll qualify for the He Waka Eke Noa scheme. If it doesn't meet the definition of ETS and is able to be planted out, it could qualify. But if it qualifies for the ETS, then the best thing, and you want recognition for that, the best thing would be to put it in the ETS, because as it's quite a topical issue at the moment, is the ETS is very good, arguably too good at recognising sequestration from pine trees. So that a bit of a non-answer answer, but good question, and it may or may not qualify depending on some of these broad categories. But happy to chat about that one.
So you'll go and do some research, Mac, and get back to them.
Yeah, basically, yeah.
All right, we'll get into the live questions. The first one is, will dairy be hit with milk solids and meat?
Not kind of sure what that means.
I think under
Mac.
Yeah, I think under the ETS option and the processor hybrid option, will dairy farmers have to pay, for the milk solids and for when they sell their dairy cows with meat? And my understanding is yes.
All right. Farmers considered options for emission charging and concluded that emissions would not be reduced by more than 1%. What will it take to reduce farm emissions by even the low targets government has set, e.g. 24% by 2050?
Yeah, so that 1%, it was you know, a lesson for all of us in communication, I'd say, is that that 1% headline wasn't the He Waka Eke Noa options. The 1%, the less than 1% reductions that would come, that comes from the backstop. So that's the government's plan to bring ag into the ETS. So that will result in less than 1% emissions reductions. The He Waka Eke Noa options, they haven't at the moment got a price. There's a system to put in place a panel, and the panel will consider a broad range of factors, including food production and on-farm profitability, you know, the livelihood of rural communities, and the need to contribute towards emissions reduction targets, and set a price. And depending on what that price is, that will then reduce emissions by various degrees. As well as setting that price, that gives revenue that the industry, or you know, either the same or another panel, can use to, you know, subsidise mitigation tools if there's any available, to contribute towards R&D. So yeah, that was it gathered a lot of the headlines, and in hindsight, it's not a great surprise that that 1% figure was jumped on. But that 1% figure comes from plans to bring ag into the ETS. It's not the He Waka Eke Noa options. So saying that you know, those options show that, you know, we should just bring ag into the ETS, it actually shows the opposite. It shows that bringing ag into the ETS is just another tax that will not only do very little to you know, reduce emissions, it provides very little incentives until it provides an incentive to farm less. But to answer your question around the 24 to 47% target in 2050, that's why we approach that issue on the basis of what is equivalent to the target set for all the other issues, for all the other gases, beg my pardon. So it wasn't on, can we do it? Is it easy? Is it hard? It is what should we do? And what is equivalent? We want to set the same target for all the gases, so that way, you know, it's the planet only cares about warming, and that's what should be used to inform decisions. The 24 to 47% target, as we sit right now, with current technology, or the lack of technology, it will require very dramatic reductions in stock numbers, very dramatic reductions in you know, agricultural production, and this applies to the 10% 2030 target as well. That's a target that Federated farmers we're really concerned about. You know, we're concerned about it when the climate change zero carbon bill was put forward, and you know, it's both too high to be equivalent to the target set for all other gases, and it's very, very difficult to meet without cutting production, and you know, resulting in high global emissions, fewer jobs in rural New Zealand, and you know, a real kick in the guts for rural economies as well. So yeah, that's our position as it regards to targets. And yeah, I think the takeaway, those media headlines that came out as a result of that 1%, that's the 1% comes from the backstop ag and ETS. That 1% is not He Waka Eke Noa.
Has this been passed by Cabinet already, like Three Waters, and we are wasting resources?
So I guess we don't know, because none of us are in Cabinet. I mean, they could well have made a decision that no matter what piece of documentation we put in front of them in April, that they're going with the backstop. We don't know, and we won't know until April. I do feel, though, that the amount of talking that they've done around how great are we've got this partnership with our agricultural sector, they do have a little bit invested in actually coming out with something. So we will wait and see what happens there. I guess our focus is on making sure that, you know, if the Fed's logo is going to be on this document that goes to ministers, then it's a document that we are comfortable with, isn't going to, you know, stuff farming up and shift emissions overseas. That it, you know, again, like Max said, you know, our lens is always going to be that statement at the start of the presentation that was in the original document that everyone agreed to, that the pricing mechanism is there to incentivize the uptake of economically viable mitigations, and that is going to be our lens that we apply to it. The government may choose, no, they want their 10% target come hell or high water, and they'll make that decision.
Okay, next one. 100% know your number only needs one to not contribute and we have failed. How can we adjust this unrealistic milestone? Will option 2 address this issue?
I guess, yeah, those benchmark numbers, we spent a lot of time arguing with everyone else around how that was worded. It wasn't just the fact that 100% is always going to be an impossible barrier, but also, if you remember back those slides that showed the sort of closing dates or the decision dates were 1st of January or 31st of December. And for most farmings, I don't know about everyone else, but everything I do is kind of based on 1st of June to 31st of May. And so all the reporting, etc., that I'm already doing that would contribute to that is happening on that time frame. So we always argued, you know, do it in the production year, not in calendar year. I do have reassurance from a lot of the officials, etc., that, you know, so long as it's a good close to 100%, it doesn't have to be exactly 100%, they'll be happy with that. But I dare say if it's only 50%, then we might have an issue. Mac, have you heard anything different in the policy groups?
No, that's pretty much it. I think if we get close, hopefully there's a level of flexibility shown by ministers and officials there. Just in regard to whether that will change for option 2, so those targets around farmers knowing their numbers, so through a tool like Overseer, FarmX, Beef and Lamb have a tool as well now, and that tool around the milestones around having a greenhouse gas component of your farm environment plan, they're in place regardless of which pricing option we go down. So yeah, they're there no matter what we do in regard to pricing. So option 2 won't change that. So it is the overused phrase of you can't manage what you can't measure. So it is a good thing for farmers to get on the kitchen table and work out your emissions numbers one afternoon if you're so inclined, and then you can hopefully out of that draw some low-hanging fruit. So it is a good approach, and no matter which road we go down in pricing, it won't impact that. But yeah, as Andrew said, we hope there is a level of flexibility there, because getting 100% of anyone to do anything is quite difficult, as the old vaccine mandate shown, I'd say.
We've got one here. Will the benchmark year be 2017?
So in legislation in the Climate Change Response Act, for the emissions targets, it's 2017. In regards to, say, that the EMC for farmers reducing emissions, the challenge with using a 2017 benchmark is that if this is in place by 2025, there's essentially 8 years in which farmers will either not have data or have been using a tool that could be or could not be okay by He Waka Eke Noa to estimate that. So it's a very good question, and it's a question where as He Waka Eke Noa partners still trying to work out, and it's a good one to hear from you guys what you guys think it should be, certainly in February and March in these workshops. I'd say to me it'd probably look to be a 2025 benchmark or something like that from going forward. And that's a core issue we have with the benchmarking approach of EMCs, that if we say, from this date, I'm going to reduce my emissions by that much, that necessarily it disadvantages those farmers that are more efficient already. If you're overweight, it's easy to lose 5 kilos. So I could lose 5 kilos probably, but if you're an ultra marathon runner, 5 kilos is pretty hard. So that's that grandparenting problem that we have with setting benchmarks and going from there.
So I believe this one was brushed over while you were talking, Mac, but I think just need a little bit more detail. What will the single greenhouse gas calculator to be used? Those out now range hugely in complexity from 8-line and MFE.
Do you want to take this one, Andrew?
Yeah. Yes, you take it, Mac.
Oh, yep. So yeah, so it'll have to whatever tool we use for pricing, for calculating your emissions for pricing, will have to give the same result for the same input. So I'd ideally want to see it that there's a way for other tools to hook in, to use, APIs or some sort of data fishhook system to produce the same numbers given the same input. In previous talks, Andrew's used the analogy of having whether it's Xero or Cash Manager, you want to have the same, tax liability come out the other end. You don't want to have, different results for depending on which tool you use. There'd be more likely than not a He Waka Eke Noa tool developed that you'd have to put in similar data to what you're already putting in for an overseer or a Farmax or your beef and lamb or your MFE tool, so that all the results are the same. So that you can't run the numbers in 6 tools and pick the lowest one. So those tools, we've published which tools are fine for knowing your number. So that's for an awareness program. So as long as you're using one of those 6 or 8 tools that are on that website, that counts towards 25% and then 100% of farmers knowing their numbers. But that's separate to the numbers you're going to be charged on the basis of. So that's good for giving assurances, right? So if you're running your farm through those numbers, you don't have to stress that you're not going to be put at a disadvantage and once pricing comes around for getting in early and running your farm through these systems. But it is, and also an issue where we want to try and minimize the amount of paperwork and overlap in terms of data entry that farmers have to undertake as well. So it's a really good question, and it's an issue that we've all been trying to work through, is that how can we minimize minimize the time that farmers spend inputting data, because especially going forward in other areas such as biodiversity, water, I'm sure Andrew can list half a dozen of them. You don't want to spend all day inputting the same data to a dozen different government or industry bodies. So how can we minimize time farmers are doing in that regard, but also make sure that farmers entering the same data for a same farm with the same tool get the same results.
Yeah, and I'd just add, this is probably going to be an issue that, well, for me anyway, there would be a sort of non-negotiable that I only enter this bloody information once. So, I mean, I'm already entering all the information for my Fonterra reporting to generate a number. As far as I'm concerned, whatever comes out of He Waka Eke Noa, better be able to take that information and put it into it. If I have to fill it in twice, while I can't speak for the entire National Council, I can certainly tell you which way my vote will be going in terms of not having Fed's logo on any document that makes me enter data twice, because I absolutely detest paperwork and I have no intention of supporting anything that creates any more paperwork for me.
So we've got at 113 million, it's consultants and middle management creating a wasted cash flow for them. How do we reduce this to input into improvements?
Yeah, and that's, I guess, another reason why we kind of favour that the rebate approach, because it's not money washing into various schemes to fund. I guess this is, although that 113 million is probably going to be, a lot of it's going to be spent on building systems that information, the Fonterra data talks to whatever the MFE data point that calculates it. This is possibly where a lot of that money is going to go, the 113. Now, personally, I'm struggling to understand why it's going to cost so much. And, the Farm Leaders Group, we have pushed back on this and asked for a breakdown as to where is all this money going to? Are we double counting? Because there is already a lot of farm plans and all this information recording that's expected in all these other areas that farmers are already doing. Are we counting things twice? So, yeah, I'm not too sure about this 113, and we'll soon see if it is a real amount, and that's probably what scared a lot of people off from going down that the farm level route, but are we going to have to end up there anyway? And is there a way of doing this in a much smarter and more efficient way? Certainly, if you talk to processors who are collecting all this data, who are crunching all these numbers and getting all this stuff from farmers, they're struggling to understand how do they come up with 113 million. But we all know how government departments work, especially around IT. You've only got to think a few years back to the old police computer INSYS and how much it blew out, and NovaPay, and all the other examples of how government's fantastic at spending money on IT and not getting great results. So that's a potential there. But that's something we are just going to keep drilling into and getting an understanding. And, is there a better way? Is there a smarter way of doing this? Because certainly we don't want to be spending a truckload of money, like you say, on admin, middle management, rather than actually doing stuff on farm.
So we've got one here. How will this be applied in an arable setting? Not as simple as meat and milk. It doesn't appear to have any recognition of our sequestration in form of grain. Carbon sequestration in grain is very short term, but no different from trees on a geological time frame.
Yeah, so for arable, arable farms that don't have some sort of, many arable farms are mixed stocking farms as well that also have, sheep or cattle through. But for those farms that are purely arable, the charge will come in that B category of that A plus B minus C, and the B will come for your charge for fertilizer. So either under the processor level, it'll just be, a value for the amount of the tons of fertilizer you apply, again, depending on what that panel decides, a value for, X cents per ton or X dollars per ton. And then for the farm level option, depending on, application factors, how that fertilizer is used, it could slightly change that, but a similar approach. In terms of sequestration for grain, again, for sequestration, there's this, it's the permanence factor that's challenging. So for grain, because it's being consumed by people or by animals, that it's not permanent. And when you're dealing with dollars per ton, it's been a long process for getting a harvested, I can't remember what it's called off the top of my head, but it's a harvested wood products value for timber. So saying that X% of wood will be kept in say lumber for housing for X% of years, and having some sort of value for that. So that's been a long, challenging process, I understand, for the forestry sector for timber. And so something for grain, I just wouldn't be practical in my view. And that's similar for grass, and similar for wool as well, is the other one that we hear about, is that just that the permanence isn't there, and then it's just the amount of carbon in it just doesn't add up as well.
The beef and lamb emissions calculator only takes 20 minutes to complete. Why has He Waka Eke Noa estimated a minimum of 25 hours? Is this not scaremongering or misleading, and doing farmers a disservice by encouraging them to not adopt on-farm emission reporting, which is most likely to achieve the lowest net emission cost and most flexibility?
Yeah, I would kind of agree with that. I do think in terms of the pricing, the level of recording is probably going to need to be a little more detailed than what goes into the calculator. You'll need to be sort of referencing or be able to verify fertilizer inputs, etc., and that sort of stuff. But yeah, when I saw those numbers of how long it was going to take to do, even for me as a dairy farmer, it was saying I needed to spend 8 or 10 hours. I'm already spending that time doing the exact same job anyway. So the reality is there is no extra time for me in doing this. That's one thing great to hear some feedback from, would want to hear some feedback from sheep and beef farmers in terms of, are you already recording all this information? Is it easy enough? Is that number just complete and utter scaremongering. That's great feedback for us to have and to be able to drill down, because that's, you know, obviously adds to that supposed cost of 113 million.
Yeah, so that, like, just to add to that, Andrew, like, yeah, we want to hear from you guys. Is that fair? Because if the case, you know, if those times are reduced, if we say that's not fair, then the case for the processor hybrid option becomes much less compelling, right? That is a result of the fear of that $113 million estimate. That is the expert opinion of subject matter experts we've got in, but we want to hear from you guys, farmers, as to what you think. And yeah, that's one in February. There'll be a report released that goes through the assumptions in that $113 million, goes through here's the estimates, and yeah, in particular the farmer time one. That yeah, I'm not a farmer, but that seems like a lot of time to me. So yeah, just as Feds, we're really interested to hear from you guys.
I reckon I'll ask one more question and then we can wrap up. If I haven't gotten to your question, we'll do our best to send out some email replies when we can get to them. So the last one I've got is, can a farmer offset greenhouse gas in exotic forest greater than 1 hectare if the forest is not registered for the ETS?
It's an easy one to end on. So in regards to exotic forestry, we've said if it's eligible for the ETS, so if it's 1 hectare, if it's 30 meters wide, 30 meters canopy cover, and at least 5 meters tall, I believe. If it's eligible for the ETS, then it doesn't qualify for this system. You can offset it, but you'd offset it just simply in your bank account by entering that forestry into the ETS. The reason for this is that you know, the mission goal of the He Waka Eke Noa sequestration workstream was to recognise sequestration that can't be recognised, and ETS forestry can be recognised. And another one is if we open essentially the floodgates to those forms of sequestration, this scheme has to be, the He Waka Eke Noa pricing mechanism has to be revenue neutral. Government's not chipping in any money into this. So if farmers want recognition for 40,000 hectares of pines recently planted, that has to come from that A and B side of the ledger. So farmers have to be charged a lot more. So that's where that comes from. So short answer, no. Yeah, long answer to a short question, but yeah, short version, no.
All right, I think we'll try and wrap up there. As I said, we'll try and get to your questions via email if we can. If you've only caught on to half of this, there should be a recording available eventually, but I'll hand back to Andrew to wrap up.
All right, thanks everyone. Much appreciated all of your feedback and questions you've had for us. Really, you know, it's great that, and I guess what would be really helpful for us is if you wanted to email through your thoughts after hearing all that. What do you think? What do you want to see? What are you feeling about it? It will certainly help us going forward in terms of all the discussions that happen. But anyway, look, thanks for listening. Hope everyone has a great Christmas. Certainly hope the sun comes out around here. And if you're one of those few farming areas that's only had the sun and not any rain, I hope you get my rain. So thank you, everyone. I'll see you. Bye.